Hello, Craig. Good to meet you.
I am. Thank you.
So, can we start then with your journey into Quakers? Can you tell us a bit about how long ago that was, and what were you seeking, and what did you find?
So I first came to Quakers about 25 years ago, in Liverpool. I grew up without any religion at all, and in my 20s I spent um, searching really. First of all, with a Buddhist group at university, practice with them, and then exploring different Christian communities after a very formative um, number of visits to the Taize community in France, which had a big impact on me. And then when I was 30 or so, living in Liverpool, I was newly married, and we were living in a community there, a house of hospitality for people seeking sanctuary. And I really felt that I wanted to belong properly. Um, I had quite a lot of experience with different religious communities, um, but I wanted to find something I could really commit to. And I've been very influenced by reading, particularly the early Quaker writings from the 17th century, and also I discovered John Woolman's journal, which had a very profound impact on me. And I felt that this was the tradition that really spoke to my experience most authentically. And I realized that the Quaker community that I was joining was not the Quaker community of the 17th or the 18th century by a very long stretch. Um, but it felt like there was the richness in that tradition that I wanted to be nourished by, and also a community of people who, over generations, had nurtured this tradition of practice and spirituality, which I wanted to sort of be connected to, become a part of. Um, so I started going to meeting in Liverpool, and became a member there.
Gosh, well, there's a lot in there that I'd like to know more about, and maybe we'll leave for a little bit this thing about, Quakers today are not what we were in the 17th century, because I think I'd love to talk to you about that. Can I go back and ask a little bit more then about some of the things you said had a profound impact on you? And I suppose I'm interested in the fact that you've lived in so many spiritual communities already. I mean, you're still a young man, so that's quite a statement to say that you've lived in lots of different religious communities. So I'd like to know a bit more about that. And you mentioned Taize, um, which I love the sound of. Um, and I suppose the other thing that I'm left with a question of is, what do your family make of all of this if you've grown up without religion? And then here you are exploring all these deep traditions. So, can you tell me any more about that?
Um, yeah, so I was, I guess, not very connected to my family in my 20s. I was quite troubled and disorientated, I would say. I think, as many people are in their 20s. Um, and I really was in need of finding a purpose and a sense of direction for myself and a sense of meaning, which I felt I hadn't been brought up with, and I couldn't see where to find that. Um, so yeah, there wasn't so much like a conflict with a family thing, because I was off doing my own thing. But I got very, I'll say lucky. I don't. It feels like more I was gifted an opportunity to find uh spiritual practices and communities and traditions which really were able to speak to me. Um, so I was in a Buddhist group at university with a very wise, very compassionate Buddhist teacher, um, and I learned a lot from him. Um, and Buddhism was a kind of uh, entryway for me into spirituality, I suppose, because I was a very sort of doctrinaire atheist as a teenager and a young man, and I felt that Buddhist practice was something I could do without any commitment to any kind of religious or spiritual beliefs. It was just presented very pragmatically as, try this and find what's helpful for you. And as a result of that experience of practicing meditation, it felt like a new dimension of experience was open to me, that I was able to encounter the world in a different way, just from the experience of having a more open and spacious consciousness. And then I had a girlfriend at university who was a Christian, and she had been encouraging me to visit Taize community with her. So I went at the end of university as as a Buddhist, basically, as an atheist Buddhist, um, and was just blown away by it. It's um, really remember the first time I went into the church there, and it's a monastic Christian community that offers retreats particularly to young people from all over the world. And they have thousands of young people there at a time. And the first time I went into the church, they sing these repeated chants in harmony, very beautiful, very simple, sung refrains of pieces of scripture or prayers. And you sit on the floor in this very simple, quite dimly lit church, and thousands of young people singing, and the sound just rolling over you, and then quite a long period of silence in the middle of this prayer. Just incredibly powerful, and I I kept going back. Basically, there was something there that really drew me. And a couple of years later, on one of my visits, I had a very profound experience of a kind of heart-opening um, it's difficult to describe, but experience I felt as if something was changed and opened inside me, um, and that my life was sort of reorientated in a way, instead of this kind of anxious lostness, and searching and sort of desperate sense of meaningless and emptiness. That had an encounter with something which was um, seemed to answer that need. And that's what took me then to uh, exploring Christian spirituality and theology, which was something I didn't know about at all. So I sort of really launched into trying to find out what all this was about, and read the Bible for the first time and read a lot of theology and Christian spirituality. Um, yeah, and took me in, exploring different communities as well, including so I stayed a summer on Iona, the Iona community, and I lived for 6 months in a lay community at Worth Abbey, which is a Benedictine um, monastery in Sussex.
Wow. I mean, I think it's quite a dramatic shift, isn't it? To go from atheist, because some people will say, well, I'm agnostic, but to say that you're actually, very firmly atheist. So what is your experience now then, or what is your how do you describe yourself now? Are you Christian? What's your relationship with Jesus?
So I consider myself a Christian. I think most Christians wouldn't consider me a Christian. I'm a Christian of a very heterodox sort, is how I think of it. I mean, partly that's a result, I think, of coming to exploring the Christian tradition without having a church background. Because when I started to read the Gospels, for instance, it was, very clear that the teaching of Jesus was not at all what is practiced in mainstream churches. He was very explicit about um, call no man father, don't say long prayers and, draw attention to yourself. And it's about building the kingdom of God and participating in that reality. Um, and there's really nothing about being expected to sign up to specific doctrines about, the afterlife and all the rest of it. So I my understanding of Christianity was very much, I understand it as really as poetry, I suppose, as something that speaks to my experience when provides languages and images which speak to that experience, not as a sort of belief system or a doctrinal system. Which I think is the least interesting and least important part of the Christian tradition.
Hmm.
And there's that is part of the Christian tradition, that mystical and prophetic a current that runs through the Christian tradition, but it's always been a kind of um, a minority kind of report within the Christian tradition, I think.
Hmm.
Um, and especially in kind of modern Christianity and in Protestantism in particular, which has got this big faith emphasis on intellectual kind of faith, on doctrine and belief as being the core of religion, which has never been about for me. Um, my uh, my faith is about experience and practice, not about having a specific set of beliefs, because how I think about religion, I've always felt right to be quite flexible and to be fluid and to change over time in response to different experiences, rather than something I sort of, hold on to and say, I believe X, Y, and Z. So that's how I understand Christianity. And that was really one of the things that really spoke to me about when I discovered the early Quaker writings, was that they seem to be speaking from that same understanding of that the language of faith is the language of experience. It's about giving words to experience rather than a kind of external set of beliefs which you then have to sign up on them, in order to qualify in some way.
I mean, I agree completely with you, and I, I love to hear how different people articulate these because these are difficult things to put into words.
Yeah.
And what you've just talked about is experience, and the words you used was a heart-opening experience, which, you know, I agree with. And I think until you have one of those experiences, it's all a little bit murky and difficult to understand. And that, as you say, something changes the moment that that happens, and it's an amazing experience. Can you tell us any more about what happened for you?
Um, I'm not sure I can. I think it's no. I think experiences like this are very common. In fact, many people have them, and don't necessarily have, and not necessarily religious people, or don't necessarily have religious language to interpret them or understand them. But it's a normal part of human consciousness, and has always been, I think, to experience deeper levels of awareness and reality. Um, and uh, they can be profoundly transformative. Um, but also, I think there's a danger in kind of seeing, peak experiences or mystical experience as a thing to be. For a long time, I thought that the point of my religious life was try to recapture that kind of experience, um, and I think that actually that's not, I had the kind of experience I had because of the kind of condition I was in at the time.
Mm.
Um, I was very, blocked, um, emotionally, in quite a difficult place, and a kind of a loosening of that felt like a very dramatic transformation. For another person who had a different kind of emotional makeup, I think would experience that very differently. So in itself, it's not important. What's important is, of course, it was important for me,
Yeah.
but it's not important that anyone should have an experience that feels like that. It's important that someone is on the path which is enabling them to
Mm.
become more open and receptive to how the spirit's leading them, and whatever that looks like for them. For some people, it's a much more gradual or less dramatic feeling kind of path.
Yeah, I really like that notion of being blocked, and I must admit I haven't really thought about that before. That those of us who were blocked needed an opening much more than those who perhaps have never been blocked. And I don't know if you are familiar with this book here, Thomas.
Mm.
In it, he says something similar to that, which is the point is not to be always trying to go back to recreate that feeling, because I think that is quite common, perhaps, is it? If you and I have both thought that to begin with, you think, oh, I need to have that feeling again. And you realize it's impossible. You can't have that feeling again. But I've never really thought of it like how you've just put it, that we were perhaps especially blocked. And I suppose it's really interesting because I think within Quakers today, one thing I must admit I worry about sometimes is that we don't talk about these things. Um, and that if we do talk about them, there's a tendency to think, oh, well, the people who've had peak experiences are somehow a bit further ahead in the journey than the others who haven't. And we don't want to get into that kind of,
Mm.
you know, situation. But it still seems to me that there's something that we don't do well enough as a community in encouraging people to share those experiences if they've had them. And I mean, would you say that if people haven't had a peak experience, would you encourage them to visit Plum Village or to visit some kind of, to try to see if that is possible for them, or would you advise them just don't worry about that at all?
Um, I would say don't worry about it at all. I think I don't think that we should be seeking any particular kind of experience in our spiritual life. I think what we should be seeking is um take a more full life, to be more fully human. Um, and that to do that, we need to be finding ways to be open and receptive to however the spirit is leading us right now in our lives. And that may have nothing to do with kind of, spiritual experiences. It may be, um, in quite another direction, um, where people have a sense of being drawn to that, a sense of leading towards it, wanting to explore it more deeply, um, contemplative or meditative practices or traditions, then I'd certainly encourage them to do it, because there can be that sense of being drawn, being intrigued, or just seeing something in it which feels attractive, that can be the guide, the inward guide, which is nudging us in that direction and pointing us towards something. There's something for you here. But it may be, it depends where we are. It may be what the the inward guide is pointing us towards in our life is to do with our relationships, or to do with our family, or to do with our work choices, or something,
Mm.
um, something else.
So, I mean, I want to talk about our practices quite a bit, but can I just come back and push you one more time about Jesus? What's your Where are you at the moment with the figure of Jesus?
So the Gospels have been very formative for me in um, offering a language for understanding the experience of faith, and the figure of the character or the personality of Jesus as an image um, of loving, inclusive, courageous, spirit-filled life, um, is important to me. I think I don't have a kind of traditional Christian devotional kind of practice particularly. We've had, since the children were very little, since they were toddlers, basically, we've um, had a simple Teze prayer at home, which we still do. In fact, usually on Sunday evenings, and we have an icon and light a candle, and we sing some Teze chants, and we have a period of silence together. So that's been very much a part of our family tradition. Uh, and I suppose that's the closest that uh, I come to a traditional Christian sort of practice. And it's an icon of Jesus. But I think that the focus of my kind of faith and theology is on um, Christ as a present reality, as
Mm.
that spirit which is present now and active now in everybody,
Yeah.
and that uh, the person Jesus was someone who showed what that is like, can be like in a human life. Um,
And you use the phrase inward teacher.
mm,
And I don't know if uh, how how much consideration you've given to that term, because theologically I am not an expert at all, but I understand there's a difference between um, over Quaker thought over the last few centuries between the inward light and the inner light, and that shift from using inward to inner is quite specific. And the way I look at it, and like I say, I'm not a theologian, but that anything inner is part of me and inside of me, and inward means it's coming from somewhere else. So I like the word inward. I like the meaning of that. Is that something you've thought about deeply? Is it a conscious choice?
I prefer the term inward, partly because it's the term that was used by early Quakers, so it just feels has a more resonance for me. Um, I have I don't know what I haven't bottomed this out. I've heard the argument that there's a theological difference between inward and inner. Um, that inward suggests that it's coming from somewhere else, as you say. I've also seen it claimed that inward is just a 17th century English version of of inner, and
I see.
I don't know what's the case there, um, and I'm um, I'm not sure that that's a major distinction for me. I think more that it's interesting because this understanding of this teaching that there is an inward guide, an inward light, an inward teacher, an inward Christ. Right from the very beginning, there were lots of different terms used for this, but that was the kind of core discovery, this new kind of exciting um, revelation that early Quakers had had. Um, and it was really the thing that distinguished them the most from um, established Christian churches. Um, and it's something that is almost forgotten about now, it seems to me. It's like we don't talk about it, we don't regard that as important. We talk a lot about Quaker values um, and Quaker worship, but that there is an inward guide that we can actually encounter in our experience, and that can actually lead us and lead us into a fuller and more meaningful life, and enabled us to find our actual purpose and what we're actually here to do in the world, um, has become a very sort of marginal aspect of Quaker um, tradition, which seems to me curious. So um, I think when it is talked about, it's there's the kind of a secularization of it, which is that everyone has got their own inner light, um, and it's about finding what's my inner light, and it's got nothing particularly to do with your inner light kind of thing, and my inner truth and your inward truth kind of thing, um, which is from a kind of modern, um, very very secularized, very individualized perspective. That's an obvious kind of direction in which that idea has been taken, which I think that does lose something really important, which is that it's not just about our own individual truth or our own individual values or something, but that there's a reality, a shared reality that we can make contact with, whatever we call it.
So in your descriptions there, you've been talking about if we were to advise somebody looking for this, we'd advise them to look for a contemplative mystical tradition and these profound spiritual practices. And yet we're kind of both thinking similar things that in some ways in Quaker meetings across the UK at the moment, some of this is being lost or at least just ignored, if you like. It's over in the corner and it's
Mm,
still there-ish, but it's
mm,
a private experience perhaps, and it's
mm,
not the predominant culture. And this really worries me,
mm.
and it's something that this is why I want to talk about it with people. So, it is, do you still feel that Quakers in Britain today are still providing a contemplative mystical tradition with a deep spiritual practice? Um, yeah, are we still that? Or have we become a secular organization focused on climate issues and diversity issues and that's it really?
I think it's there if you dig for it. Um, and it's not surprising because any religious organization that's been around for 400 years is not going to be the same. It's not going to have the same prophetic fire as it did in its first generation. I mean, that was already going very, very early, in the Quaker movement. And it's normal for a kind of institutionalized religious community to become much more taken up with, keeping itself going and with its own particular culture and its own way of doing things and its, meeting houses and its accounts and all the rest of it, much, take up much more energy than actual spiritual practice. Um, but there's a really rich tradition there. Um, but you have to go looking for it. I think that what is missing, has been missing for a long time, is a willingness and an actual desire to actively share it with people, particularly the newcomers, but also with each other. And this is where I think we've really let people down
Mm.
uh, for a long time, because we've developed this Quaker culture of just not sharing, not inviting people, not sharing the riches that are there, even those people who are aware of them, sort of keeping them to themselves.
Mm.
And I find that extraordinary, really, because these practices, this really rich tradition is something the world needs, and that
Mm.
people who are growing up in this society really, really need, because it's the culture is not providing people with what we need to live. So if we're hanging on to this really precious tradition and not sharing it, even with each other, uh, we're failing in generosity. And I think that the crisis situation that Quakers in Britain are in now is not a kind of an accident. It's a result of having failed to share this tradition, deliberately chosen not to for many decades. Um, and this is where you end up if you do that. So I think it is there, and there are meetings which are very spiritually alive. There are many, many people who are in the Quaker community who are um, extraordinarily wise, spiritually alive, um, who have an enormous amount to give. It's something about the culture of modern Quakers rather than about, individual failings or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a story that we've told ourselves for a long time, that actually you need to keep quiet about this, keep it to yourself, don't be, too enthusiastic, um, don't tell anyone else about it. That's the problem.
And also, I feel that I do agree with you. I think the culture is the main problem at the moment. And it's more than just keep quiet about it. It's more that there's also a lot of other noise. And there's a lot of other conversations taking place around, as I say, Quaker values, or as you know, I think it's progressive politics. I mean, it's become this other thing. And there's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk about all sorts of political issues. And that has gradually, it was a 50-50, now it's a 60-40, then it's a 70-30 and 80. And now we're kind of, it seems, dominated by a culture that is focused on progressive politics. Um, and I don't know, am I taking that too far in my analysis? I don't know, but the reason for these conversations came about from the Future of Quakers conference in October. I don't know if you were there at that, were you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it seemed to me that the talks we were being given were had the same analysis as from 10 years ago. And that analysis is basically, well, we're not diverse enough. And once people realize that we're very inclusive as a church, suddenly we'll have a load of people join us. And I just think, no, I just don't see that is true. I don't think it's going to work like that. And I think it's demonstrably not working because it's the same analysis that was said 15 years ago. And the whole whoosh conversation, if you remember about that, that one day we're going to go whoosh. And I just don't think that is true. And I think, in fact, we're probably losing people more than we're gaining people because of this lack of clarity about what our profound spiritual practice is. And you use the word exciting. I find Quaker meeting exciting. I'm not convinced everybody in the room with me, wherever I go, this isn't about one local meeting. I'm not convinced that everybody finds it exciting. What do you make of that?
I think that there's concern about uh, Quakers in Britain becoming a kind of political movement. I think that's been around for a long time, and I think that there is a kind of a secularizing sort of tendency to say, well, what we're really about is about a set of values, and these are turned into a set of, political positions, and that's what Quakers do. That's who we are, and it's much easier to talk about that than it is about religion or spirituality or spiritual experience. Um, and it's sort of you can justify it in completely secular terms as, well, we're working for peace and we're working for equality and so on. Um, And at the same time, in local meetings, what many of the local friends I talk to say, also, we just like our nice, quiet, small Quaker meeting. We like the silence, and that's what we come for. Not engaged with anything wider than their local meeting and the nice silence on a Sunday morning at all. And both of those I see as a problem, really, and neither of them as being anything to do particularly with Quaker
No.
uh, spirituality. I don't see Quaker spirituality as a mystical faith. I see it as a prophetic one, in its origins, in the first generation of Quakers. Um, their focus was not on having deep contemplative silent experience and stopping there.
Mm.
The point of their worship and their encounter with the inward guide was so that they could be changed, transformed, and be sent into the world to do something. Um, and we've sort of split that prophetic uh, experience, that prophetic spirituality, into these two things, into politics on the one side, and on having some nice, quiet, recharging time on a Sunday morning. Um, and both of those are very very, very thin and very superficial, uh, compared to this experience of actually encountering this inward spirit, being transformed by it, and being sent to do something. And what you're sent to do may be political. It may be something very mundane, maybe something very hidden with your, neighbors, with your family, whatever.
Mm.
But I'm convinced that there is a reason why we're here. We all have been given gifts to give to the world, whatever that is. Um, and the point of our spiritual practice and our Quaker communities is to discover that and to bring it in, bring it out, bring it, bring it forward and bring it into the world. So yes, I think that the framing Quakerism purely as a kind of political project um, is a mistake, and it loses um, the depth of what Quaker tradition is. Um, but so is this idea that we just, it's all about sitting in silence and recharging our batteries. I think that's also missing something really profound.
Yeah. And also that disconnect that you've just mentioned is draining, isn't it?
Mm,
And this recharging the batteries is not going to happen just in an hour of silence in a
mm,
meaningful way. So we have this entire society which is feeling drained. Now
mm,
I'm not feeling drained.
mm,
Um, I don't know if you are, but I can see that the way in which we're operating at the moment is draining to people. And I really like the words you've used, which I wouldn't have known that. This idea of the mystical and then the prophetic. So I actually ministered at the early meeting, which is kind of a shocking and horrifying thing. But if you remember, I don't know if you heard it, but this image that I use of using the image of us sitting around a lake. And when we first come in, the waves are really quite choppy, and gradually we settle down, and in the end, it becomes a very smooth surface of the water. And I realized that that is not enough. And I suppose in my own meeting a few weeks after that, I ministered that, that's not the important thing. I've realized the important thing is that in that quiet and in that silence, you then hear the crackling of the fire. And, I had a lovely conversation with someone afterwards about, yeah, that's the fire. And, Jesus was cooking fish on the fire and, whatever, however the image works for you. But I suppose that sums up exactly what you've just said, that the mystical is important to be able to hear the still small voice and to hear really what you're being given and taught in that. And that allows you to go out. But this disconnect, if people are never centering down in that way, well, where are they getting their ideas from? Where are these political messages and actions coming from if it's not that deep place? And it's so easy to be misled then, isn't it? So I'm really concerned. I mean, this series of conversations has come from this disappointment, really, of what happened at our conference in October. Um, I mean, I don't even know what to say about it. I was just disappointed about the whole experience. And I don't feel that until we get the analysis right of what's wrong, we don't know how to correct it. What did you think of the conference and the analysis of the future of Quakers?
Um, well, to be positive about it, I think we are somewhere different to where we were 10 years ago. I mean, it feels like there's a number of people who've been saying for a long time that we're in serious trouble as a religious community, and we need to rediscover the spiritual richness of our tradition and to renew our community from those spiritual roots. 10 years ago, it felt like not many people were seeing that there was a problem. Um, Now, I think there's a really widespread awareness that there is a problem. And there's a lot of sort of confusion and anxiety and distress about the problem and lack of clarity about what the roots of it are. But at least we are, as a community, I think, starting to acknowledge that really this is no longer working for us. And I think that's been driven by the fact that many, many meetings, the wheels are coming off. That they're just unable to appoint role holders, that people are just not willing to serve, and they're people who are doing it are aging, and they've seen their meetings decline, and it's obvious that it's no longer working. That's a real moment of opportunity for us, I think. I think if, the worst thing we could do would be to just, for the last few decades, we've just carried on thinking, oh, everything's comfortable, everything's fine. And it's nice, we just keep it to ourselves. Cozy club. We know everybody in this meeting, we've known them forever, and we all just come and enjoy the silence together, and then we go home, and that's it. I think the fact that that is no longer working is presenting with us with a real challenge and a real opportunity. I agree. I don't think we have yet got clarity about what the roots of the crisis are, or how we're being called as a community to respond to it and to change as a result. I think I saw that conference as hopefully the beginning of a wider conversation. I think we need some fresh voices in that conversation. We need people to speak who are have got a message that's given for this community at this time. And if this community has got a future, which I believe it has, then it will be because um, the spirit is active in within it to raise up people who can provide a vision and direction that speaks to our condition and can offer us new forms for the future. And the encouraging thing that I see alongside this, the meetings in crisis and in the sense of sort of malaise, is that at the same time we've got quite a lot of meetings which are seeing more new people coming
Mm.
than there have in many, many years. So people, it's not, the people have been telling each other for a long time, oh, young people are not interested, in religion anymore. And oh no, no one's coming, that means no one's interested. Um, Actually there is a real hunger out there, and there are meetings which are seeing more young adults coming than they've ever seen. Um, and I've been talking to, a number of young adults who come recently to Quakers around the country, and they're saying to me the same thing. They're saying they are looking for community, they're looking for meaning, they're looking for purpose in their life. And they're coming wanting that and serious about it. And also that interestingly, this generation of people in their 20s now, they're not allergic to religion and Christianity in the same way that, people of our generation and older, um, many of them have been. They're because they've never experienced it, they've never encountered it, so they're not reacting against anything. It's just, it's wide open for them. It's like, okay, I don't know anything about that. What's that?
Yeah.
Um, and so it means that they're open to taking what is life-giving and what's helpful, and not having their buttons pressed by, associations with things that are, authoritarian or whatever, that, because they've never grown up in Sunday school, they've never had all that stuff. So, um, and that's really encouraging for me.
Yeah. And I think that's where these conversations have been so helpful for me personally to be starting to talk about what is it we're doing and what are some of the issues, and to try to become clearer about what could we do, like what are the kinds of things we should be talking about. And I suppose that there's a few different things that I've been thinking about, which I'd like to run past you and see if you think am I heading in the wrong direction, or can you see where I'm getting at? One is, which is not pleasant, but I think we perhaps have a bureaucracy at the centre which is not helpful. And I worry a little bit that we have simply too large a staff body who are fairly ingrained in keeping the thing going and don't really help develop that depth of spiritual practice in local meetings across the country, up and down the land, finding what is exciting and life-giving. And yet this costing us a lot of money. And it's obviously some people have had their whole careers within that system. So I worry that that's too big and self-perpetuating in some way, which worries me. Um, so that's one thing, which is not, it's an unpleasant thing to talk about, isn't it? Because these are our friends and people who care deeply about the society. But one of the one of the reasons I took a kind of editorial decision, if you like, about these conversations is to focus in very closely on people's individual spiritual experience first, in some detail, because until I've heard that, I'm not that interested in what you've got to say about anything else.
Mm.
Um, so it does worry me that there's staff who are not Quakers, staff who are not Christian, religious in some
Yeah.
way. What do you make of all of that?
Well, I should declare an interest here because I'm a staff member of Quakers in Britain. I'm a local development worker for Yorkshire. Um, so I'm not sure if there's too much I can say about that. I think I hear a lot the concern about the number of staff, the amount of influence that staff have within the Quaker community. And I've, certainly shared some of that concern at times. I've been encouraged by, I think, by the movement towards decentralizing the um, the role of staff within Quakers in Britain over the last just few years. And obviously I'm a local development worker, so I've got a biased perspective on this, but I see that was a big shift in direction that was taken, and a very painful and costly decision was taken um, to restructure the staff roles, which meant losing a lot of staff, London-based staff, in order to resource having a locally based staff in every area of the country. So we've got 15 local development workers in every area of the country, as well as um, youth development workers in some parts of the country as well. Um, so that was a very big change of direction, and I think a very important one because it's the focus of that is actually working directly with local communities um, to support them to thrive, and that's the role of local development workers to support Quaker communities to thrive, not just in meetings, but in any other kinds of community as well. I think that's a really helpful development, a really important direction, because without thriving Quaker communities, we're not going to have anything to offer.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, staff can only do so much, but especially given the very low and state of many of our local meetings and lack of energy that's there, support from people who are resourced and paid to have the time and resources to help them with those local communities, I think is really valuable, really
Hmm.
important.
Hmm.
Um, and we've got some really, gifted people doing those roles, and also many of them have a real sense of religious vocation. They're people who are doing this. It's not just a job. They're doing this as part of their Quaker ministry in a sense of having a leading to do this, to serve the Quaker community in this way. Um, and certainly for me, it feels like doing this role is an opportunity to bring all of my kind of different experience with different religious communities and with the wider Quaker world over the last 20 years. Um, and to offer it um, to try to have to support Quakerism in Yorkshire to find its spiritual basis and to find its direction. Um, so I'm sure there are things that the organisation Quakers in Britain could be doing better um, to enable the renewal of Quakerism. Um, and in some ways, I think we're trying to find what that looks like, find out how can we be most effective, how most helpful, um, and still learning in that. Really, it's quite early days because it's a new model which is, been started out in a very experimental spirit, and we're still trying to, discover how it works. Um, I wouldn't say that's where the main problem is. Really, I would say that the problem is not the staff. I would say the problem is shared by all of us as Quakers, which is a form of Quakerism which has outlived its life. Uh,
Yeah, and I think before we talk about the responsibility of all of us, which I do agree, and I'd like to get to that, but if we just finish off this conversation about the centralized staff, I mean, I agree with you that we're moving in a good direction there, and to decentralize that work, I think is a good idea, and I think probably we need to go further down that line as well. I suppose I'm aware that what I just said about, how we find people suitable for that roles, I think we have to be quite spiritually demanding of those people as part of the recruitment process. And I don't know if that's been the case or not. I mean, I'm sure it's been done as well as it can be, but inevitably managerial concerns get involved, um, and more kind of pragmatic issues become central. So I suppose I would like some reassurance about can every staff member in Quakers in Britain talk like you have done for half an hour about your deep spiritual practice and faith? Um, because I think they should be able to. And if they can't, I'm worried about their very, very influential role in our society. And I think it's part of the problem. I'm not saying it's the biggest problem, but I think it's part of the problem. And one of the reasons for that is when you say you don't, the staff are not the big issue here. Well, we do have gatekeeping, we do have censorship. And what worries me, we've been talking about this disconnect, and if we say there's this caricature here of the deep spiritual person, and with a very small voice, perhaps, and a caricature here of the person who's much more pragmatic, much more activist, and not really got a strong sense of their own spiritual practice, with perhaps a very loud voice. And what worries me is that there's a lot of loud voices being listened to. And we can talk the talk about discernment, but I'm just not entirely convinced sometimes that the most influential, powerful gatekeepers employed by Quakers in Britain are listening to the quieter voices. So we end up with this skewed society. Um, and yeah, I'd just like to know what do you make of that? I mean, or reassure me, maybe I've got it wrong. What do you make of what I'm saying there?
well, I suppose there's a couple of things. I think, there's a process of institutionalization, which Quakers are certainly, very institutionalized, as, all churches which have been around for several hundred years are. And part of that is having, a lot of charities, far too many charities, in my opinion. 70, area meeting charities plus, numerous others is absolutely crazy. And Quakers in Britain is a charity as well, obviously. And as soon as you have a charity, there is a whole lot of regulatory, managerial, financial, HR, all sorts of stuff which goes along with that, and which, inevitably takes priority in some ways because all of that stuff has to be done. Um, legally that you're required to do all sorts of things which are incredibly complicated, time consuming, and actually nothing whatsoever to do with the spiritual mission of the community, but they've got to be done. So they, take 90 or 95 or 100% of the attention of the people who are available to do them. And certainly we suffer from that, definitely. Um, that, and hence, the appeal of sort of looking back on a time when Quakers were a religious movement without any organizations, without any, charities, without any staff, without any, you know, uh, regulatory requirements, and which was driven purely by the uh, the vocation, the spiritual calling of its members.
Mm.
Um, I'm much more drawn to uh, communities which are religious movements in that way than heavily institutionalized ones.
Mm.
Um, there are obviously if you want to, there's all sorts of things that community wants to do, which requires having some sort of organization to do it. And, so there's always a balance there. Um, I think and part of a renewal process in any religious community is reshifting that balance away from the institutionalization towards the movement. And people who are not staff or the ones who are primarily concerned with maintaining the institution, the other voices, the prophetic voices, the mystical voices, having a bigger role in the community. And I think that's certainly a shift that renewal would look like more like that, move in that direction.
Mm. I hope so.
Uh, and I think the other side of it is that we are very vulnerable to just being swayed by the news agenda, and just the general cultural currents, whatever is in the news, whatever is the latest thing, is what we tend to focus on. And I really noticed that, um, in the topics that are considered by, yearly meeting, for instance, or the positions that we, the statements that we make, and perhaps some of the priorities that we focus on. And I think that is a symptom of a community which is not really solidly rooted in a collective discernment. So we're just blown about
Mm.
really by whatever is in the culture. And whatever, and these days, whatever is in the culture is shifting all the time. Every few weeks there's something new that's coming along that's the latest and the only important thing. And we forget about, um, so, we had the Canterbury commitment to become a, low carbon community, when that was in the news, and then it was like, oh, that's no longer the latest thing, and the latest thing is something else, and then it's something else. Uh, I'm not. I think that's symptomatic, really, of a lack of spiritual rootedness. I don't think it's a kind of the fault of any particular people or group of people. I think it's a wider issue.
Mm. So let's focus then finally on what our responsibilities are, as Quakers, not just centrally. Um, what do you think we can do? Because some of the things that I've been thinking about and talking with people about is re-exploring Christianity as the 2,000-year-old tradition that we've come from, and the wisdom in that to help us, re-establish the rock on which we are founded, so we're not blown about by these winds. Looking at extended meeting for worship, because an hour is just not enough. I was speaking to somebody just the other day who was saying, historically these Sunday morning meetings would have been public meetings, whereas there were, I think, she called them retired meetings, where those of us who are convinced and we would retire for these kinds of deeper meetings for worship, which would be exciting and invigorating and not draining. Whereas these public meetings that we hold, there's perhaps a lot of work to be done and managing of that, of established people in the room like the elders and clerks and whatever. So it's about extended meetings of worship, separate times in the week, like more home groups perhaps, not just focusing on 1 hour on a Sunday, which is frankly a ridiculously short, um, you know, basis for a spiritual practice. So thinking about, what is it that we can do up and down the country that's different and getting back to these roots? And how do you listen to those voices that are deeply spiritually rooted and get less distracted perhaps by um the cultural things of the moment? Would you agree with those kinds of ideas, or do you have any other ideas?
So I think that one of the ways that we've got quite a rigid form at the moment of what Quaker meetings look like and what Quaker communities look like, and it's in a meeting house on a Sunday morning for an hour, and then you have a range of herbal teas, and then you go home, and I don't think that's enough. It's not enough for to nurture our spiritual practice. It's not enough to form communities. And I I see Quaker community as a really core, essential part of our spiritual tradition. That it's not possible for us um, to discern, to live out our testimony on our own. Um, that we need each other, and that's why communities are formed. They're formed by people who are searching and are open to the spirit being drawn together, despite all the differences of personality and background and perspective and whatever. That this common uh, searching and openness draws us together so that we can, it's this image of like a gathering a heap of coals together, and we can warm each other and we can kindle each other. We can discern together, and then we can bring our gifts into the world together. And we can't do that, with the current model. It's become too, too many places. It's just not, it's not nurturing that. I think one way that we might be led in the future is to have much more diverse kinds of Quaker community. So there's no reason why we need to be meeting on a Sunday morning for an hour. We can worship for any period of time in any place at any time during the week. It seems to me that this sort of Sunday morning model was just a copying across of a denominational Christianity, which is, completely irrelevant really to Quaker spirituality. And it increasingly doesn't work for people's, for the way of life and particularly for families and for young people who are, who the work demands and so on I just don't fit with having this, Sunday morning is not the time which is free for them. So I would like I could anticipate is having a range of different kinds of places and times for worship, and also different kinds of ways of being community together, which are provide ways in for people to explore the tradition and explore their own experience of spirituality in different ways. I've been very concerned about the absence of families in particular in most of our Quaker communities. Most meetings don't have offer anything to families and children at all. I think that's a real problem because I think that multi-generational communities are a really crucial way that we support each other, and in particularly that we raise young people in a tradition which can actually nurture their spiritual development. So communities which are actually aim to meet the needs of families, I think, are really important as well.
Mm. I want to just pick up that point a bit because I think that's really important. I mean, at meeting yesterday, we had these three young children there, running around, and it was just lovely. And we don't have many other children there, so it was great. Do you think that Quakers in Britain are known for their being in support of the family?
No, I shouldn't think so. And the way we set up most of our meetings is to suit the needs and the preferences of the people who go to them regularly, who have become retired people. So we're definitely, very much geared towards the needs and interests of retired people. Obviously, every person is important. Retired people are important. But when you set up uh, a whole organization, a whole way of being Quaker, which is entirely geared
Hmm.
to what suits retired people, then you're completely, ignoring and failing
Hmm.
everybody else. So no, I mean there's this whole, there's just a handful of regular children's meetings in the whole of Yorkshire. Um, just to name one example, and that means there's whole areas where if you're a family with young children, you're basically you haven't got the option. Um, in many areas of the country of taking part in the Quaker community. And that is precisely a time as well when people have got young children, when often they really discover or rediscover this need for a community that's really rooted in something. Um,
So what are your ideas around that then? I mean, are you talking about, I mean, it seems to me like Sunday afternoons and evenings would be better for young people, but not necessarily for families or whatever. So what do you envisage here?
one of the things we started doing in Yorkshire with the youth development worker Joe is making contact with families who are or where the young people already go to Quaker youth events, but where there aren't local meetings with regular children's meetings. And we get together regularly and have a day as a group of families. So we go around different meetings, have a meeting for worship in the meeting house, have a shared lunch together with local friends, and then have a social activity in the afternoon. So it's uh, a way for the young people to see each other, a way for the parents to um, stay connected with the Quaker community, even if they haven't got a meeting every Sunday, which will welcome them, and to form community amongst themselves as well, to uh, be support for each other. And that's just sort of emerging as a in response to this recognition that there's this need there. Um, and we're wanting to develop that and see where that goes. Um, there's also Quaker camps play quite a big role in this, I think, as a form of intergenerational community where uh, people are of all ages are getting together and having an intensive time of community, of fellowship, of worship together, um, where they can really focus on being Quaker community for for a whole week or something.
Mm.
Um, and for many people, that's their main Quaker community because the whole Sunday morning model doesn't work for them at all. But every year they go to a Quaker camp, and sometimes they've gone there and they're as children, and then they're bringing their children there, and they've developed this generations of participation in these things. Uh, yeah, so I think we need to be open to being experimental with this and seeing where we're led with it.
So do you want to finish with some final thoughts about the future of Quakers then? Are you broadly optimistic?
I I am optimistic, and that's because I am meeting a lot of young people who are on a serious search for spiritual purpose and meaning in their life, and what the Quaker way is offering is speaking to them. So that means there is a future because those young people, some of them have been brought up Quakers, some of them are new to it, but there are some very committed, very spiritually alive people there. And there are whole meetings which are being transformed by these people coming in with this open, alive, questioning, seeking approach, which is not just about, oh, we've got to keep the meeting house going, but which is like
Mm.
about what am I called to do? What is really alive in me? What do I have to offer to the world? So there's a new shape of Quakerism in the future. I think in 5, 10 years, it's going to look very different to what it does now because already very many of our meetings are really on the cliff edge, and many of them are not going to be around in just a small number of years, purely because of the demographics. Those meetings which have not welcomed new people for 30 years, which don't have any young people, um, and are not welcoming young people or families, they're not going to be around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Instead, we're going to have a different shape of Quakerism, and I don't know what it's going to look like, but I think if it's being led by these people who are really spiritually alive, open, receptive, responsive, then it's going to be a much more authentic shape of Quakerism, and it's going to be exciting, and it's one that I want to be a part of, helping to um, support it being born.
Well, that's a great place to end, Craig. Thanks very much for sharing your thoughts today. Good to talk to you.
Thank you, Emma, and you.